Good evening, everyone. I'm going to give it just 30 seconds or so for people to trickle in. And as you do come in, you should see a poll pop up. We're going to do a few of those today, but you'll see an initial one in a moment. And again, just letting people come in. We'll get started in just under a minute. All right. My name is Kitron, working with Applerouth Tutoring Services. I've been with the company for about 11, 12 years now in various capacities. These days, I work from my home in Colorado, doing mostly ACT, SAT prep online via Zoom. So I work as an elite level tutor, and then I also do some executive function coaching. Today, we're talking about the SAT math section, so a very kind of targeted, narrow presentation. We are booked for an hour, but I don't think it'll take that long. And I will make sure to leave time at the end for questions. So if you have them as they occur to you, you can put them in the Q&A, and I'll make sure that we get to those at the end. Here's our plan for the day. We're looking at format and adaptive nature of the digital SAT. All SATs now are offered just by computer, so there is no such thing as a paper test, unless you have like very extreme accommodations, I suppose. But generally, everyone who's taking the SAT now will take it on the computer. Since this presentation is about math, we're going to be looking at the content of the two math sections and strategies. Next week, there's a presentation, I think, towards the end of the week about the verbal. And then the idea is giving you guys techniques. So like just as if it was a tutoring session, like I'm not going to hide the ball. I'm going to give you guys everything I've got. We'll look at just different tactics, ways to use the graphing calculator, what to expect. And the hope is this would help you on a practice and or official SAT. So let's just briefly cover the format and the scoring. A perfect SAT score is 1600. That's been the case for most of the last 50 years or so. There was a time where it was out of 2400, dark days, but that's no longer. And it's about as short as the test has ever been. So it's a shorter test, but it's still 800 total points available for verbal, 800 total points available for math. Those get added together, and that's your total score, right? So if you get a 700 on verbal and a 500 on math, your SAT score is a 1200. You get 200 points on verbal and math just for showing up. So 400 is the lowest score one can get. And speaking of low versus high scores, we have to talk about how the test is adaptive now, meaning not question adaptive, but section adaptive, which I'll detail more on the next slide. But just understand that for both verbal and math, the first section, it's not a set form. So like the person next to you might have similar questions with different answers or words moved around. So not a single form, but the first section is going to be kind of the normal baseline level. Based on how you perform, that second section will adapt to either be very, very hard or quite a bit easier. And we want it to be harder. So the same thing is true for math. You do the math module 3 based on how you perform. Math module 4 will either be a lot harder or quite a bit easier. And the reason I put sections 3 and 4 in bold is just because that's what we're here to talk about today, is those two math sections, right? So we will just touch briefly on verbal, mostly just for the sake of getting our bearings on the test. So what does adaptive actually mean? As I said, sections 2 and 4, so the second verbal and the second math section, respectively, will vary based on how you perform in sections 1 and 3. What this means is that earlier questions can affect your scores and will affect your scores more than later ones. So to really get a very high SAT score, you have to ace module 1 and module 3, like get them all right or close to it. Then you have a lot more leeway to miss questions on that upper level module, because as long as you make the upper level, your score ceiling and your score floor are quite a bit higher. When you are taking the SAT, you can't really think much about this. Some people are freaked out when they see like, oh gosh, I'm on section 4 and it's easy. That's fine. It's going to start off easy no matter what. Take care of business, do what you can, you'll get to the upper level. You don't want to fret or be freaking out about that on test day. right? So that's why we do practice and make sure that we're getting consistently to the upper level and what that looks like. And again, it's not from question to question. So once you get to the fourth section, like if you ace the first 10 questions, that's not going to change what the next 12 look like, right? It's based on how you performed on section 3. That's how section 4 will adapt. So this was a big change. So beyond just going on the computer and getting shorter, when the test changed a couple of years ago, this was one of the biggest things. Format continued. So you've got two 32-minute verbal modules. That's 27 questions apiece. And then math is 22 questions in 35 minutes. Of those 22 questions on section 3, 2 of them will be experimental. This is another thing that as a test taker, you don't really want to think about much. So I just note it so that you know. The ACT does this thing where they have entire passages that just don't count. They're experimental and they get thrown out when they score the test. The SAT instead just mixes them in. And so you don't know which one, but a solid, like almost, I would say 10% of the questions won't count. They're for College Board to gather data for future tests. As a test taker, we just want to do our best. We can't really think about, is this experimental or not? We don't know. Total time for the test is 2 hours, 24 minutes. That includes a break between verbal and math. That is way shorter than it used to be. It used to be over 3 hours, and we get much more time per question, not just for math, but for verbal as well, which is good. It's not as much of a time crunch like the ACT was and still kind of is. The SAT is now just really like understand a lot about a few things. So easier to prepare for in that regard. All right, so let's get into the bread and butter today, which is the content of the SAT math section and strategies. And like I said, if you have questions or just want to clarify anything, put them in the Q&A, and I will make sure that we get to those. So let's talk math format specifically. We said 35 minutes, 22 questions, which leaves us with a little bit over a minute and a half per question. The paper SAT, as I mentioned, was much more of a reading test. So even when you got to math, a lot of word problems, very verbal heavy. The SAT now is much more of a pure math test, which is great for students with English as a second language, and really for all my students. I think we like it better. And then I just made a note here. Don't forget that at the beginning, or I should say in the reference sheet, which we'll look at how to access that, they always provide these formulas. So it's 3D shapes, it's area, circumference, perimeter, and then some special right triangles and a couple other little rules. So just knowing that they're there is huge, right? If you see a root 3, that might mean there's a 30, 60, 90 triangle, and you should pull up the reference sheet to go find it. Don't have to have it memorized, just have to remember, oh, right, they gave me that. I can go look for it. So as I mentioned, less of a reading burden. Math has fewer words per problem. A lot of questions have like very few words. It's just, hey, solve for X. Now only 30% of math items are even in this real world context. Used to be a lot more. ACT is still a lot more. The remaining 70% are pure math. Lots of algebras we'll see. So X, Y coordinate planes, parabolas, shifting graphs, slope and intercept, right? A lot of stuff you've done, but maybe forgotten. Most of the questions are multiple choice. So of 22 questions per section, usually 18 are multiple choice and 4 of them are grid-ins. A grid-in, aka free response or SPR, student-produced response question, requires you to actually type in an answer. So unlike A, B, C, D, where you just got a 1 in 4 shot, we can't really guess on these. And to be honest, these are worth more. So I know that I said this test is not question adaptive, but there's enough data to show that the free response questions are worth more on average than your multiple choice questions. What that means is if you're running out of time and you've got 5 questions left in 5 minutes, maybe you try to attack a free response rather than multiple choice. not only is it worth more, but multiple choice, you have a 1 in 4 shot, right? If you guess, it's not the end of the world. If you guess on one of these, I mean, not going to get it right. I've got all these notes about how to enter it in, but they actually provided on test day this table on the left. So right when you see a free response question, you'll always see this table there as well. Part of preparing for a test is knowing what to expect, understanding the format and just kind of what's going to come on test day. And so like, we don't want to be having to look at this on test day. You want to be aware. Notice what are correct and acceptable answers versus what are not. Right? 0.667 works, but 0.66 does not. Be careful when rounding, especially if you're using Desmos, which we're going to talk about a lot in the coming slides. It automatically rounds XY points to the 4th decimal place, which can affect your answer if there's other steps. So it's usually fine because we can just round it like this. But let's say we solve for X and have to plug it back in and you've rounded X. That might end up getting you a wrong answer for Y. Just be off by a little bit. That's more of an advanced thing, but just being careful with our rounding and how we enter answers. Notice the only options are a negative sign, a decimal, numbers, and a slash. That's it. Can't do square roots or squares or in pi or anything like that. So what to expect? I mean, at this point, you'll have been in the testing environment for over an hour, right? You'll have done 2 verbal modules, taken a 10-minute break, and you come back and this is what you see. So I think really important to understand that like it's all digital and we got to know the tools available. So like here, getting our bearings, and if my camera's blocking it, you can slide that around. But on the top right, you see reference sheet, which is that geometry stuff that I showed you. We see calculator, which I'll show you on the next page what that opens up. And that's probably the biggest key to math these days. Mark for review is if we're struggling, taking too long, just aren't sure. Mark it for review, come back. The ABC with a slash to the right of mark for review is an answer eliminator. More helpful on verbal than math, in my opinion. They will provide scratch paper for you to write things out, and you should. And then that black button on the bottom, you can hit that and it goes to, opens up like all the questions, including ones you've done, ones you haven't, and ones you've marked for review. So you can navigate that way instead of just doing next and back. Notice on the top in the center, time just kind of starts ticking down. You can hide it. Most people don't, but just knowing that like, yeah, you can kind of see it going down and you want to get used to that by taking practice tests. Right, so always it'll be on your device or a computer provided by the school, in a testing center at your school or usually a school nearby. And this is what we can expect to see on test day. So if you hit that calculator button, which like I can't emphasize enough how much like my job has changed a lot, because for SAT, I used to want to say, well, let's teach it this way and let's find out different ways to solve. And we still do that. But so many of the questions, honestly, are just, hey, let's just solve. Right? Let's just put it in the calculator. Let's just do the math. We don't actually have to like write things out. Sometimes it's just visualizing. So you can see on the left side, what it pulls up is that little guy. And then on the right side is if you expand it. So that's on the top right. The annoying part is it does cover the question and the choices sometimes. So you'll have to minimize it or close it out even just to see the question choices sometimes. That's a little bit annoying, but really not a big deal. You can drag it around the screen. So really can't emphasize enough, and I will emphasize it a lot, how much of a game changer this is. You can just open it, close it with one click. Definitely can bring your own calculator, and you probably should. TI-84, whatever it is, that's going to be allowable as well. But the Desmos thing, it just lets you graph things so easily. You definitely want to be familiar and practice with it, which we will do some today. We're going to look at plugging in one equation or a system of equations. If you identify where a system of equations intersects, where they cross, that can tell you the answer right away. It makes module 3, the easier module, that much easier. And then it makes the harder module a lot easier as well. Although at the end, you'll notice some stuff that we can't really use the calculator for. You're going to have to actually really understand and do the math. But early on, you don't. You just have to understand how to put it in the calculator and what your first step is. Here's what the content distribution looks like. Notice how algebra heavy this is, because algebra and advanced math are really algebra 1 and 2. And that's now 70% approximately of the math sections. That's huge. They decreased the stats stuff a lot. So while you will see some probability, percentages, mean, median, mode, there's a lot less of it now. And then geometry and trig, they've actually increased that a tiny bit. They used to provide the formulas and then never test it. Now they provide the formulas and sometimes test it. A lot of SAT math, as you might expect, is just refreshing things you've learned and forgotten. Or if you didn't have a great teacher for one topic, that could be a thing, right? Some people have gaps when it comes to trigonometry or to algebra 1, right? And you'd be surprised when you think, oh yeah, mx plus b, slope intercept, that's the easy stuff, but that's often what people are missing early on in prep. So our basic strategy is simple. It's not rocket science. It's not even science. It's exactly what every math teacher ever has probably said. Read the question, understand what is our goal. Then plan your attack, right? So just like if you're writing an essay, for math, it's a bit more of a microcosm, smaller scale. But yeah, you want to think about, do I need to actually do some math? Do I need to write out an equation on scratch paper, or should I just put it in the calculator? Then calculate without skipping steps. Of course, show all your work. And then, yeah, it's a time test. So within reason, double check. Like if it were asked about an angle measure and it looks like, this, and that's, less than 90, but you just circle an answer that says 170. That's a red flag. We don't have time to really evaluate deeply what's going on, but we could at least know, hey, that doesn't make sense. Let me look at what I might have missed, right? Maybe I found a supplementary angle instead of the correct one. And if you can't really circle what you're solving for, but if you can make, a surefire note of that, highlight it with the highlighter tool, write it down on your paper, just understand exactly that you're solving for X, not Y, right? Or maybe you're solving for 3X minus 2. That'll save you from careless errors on both sections. Something that I always tell my students is think simple. And as much as I want to emphasize Desmos and the graphing calculator, there are times where we can't really use it, or it's not the best way. So if it's basic algebra, which a lot of this test is, maybe we can do something simple like isolating a variable, right? Just getting X or Y by itself. Things that we've all done millions of times, combining like terms, factoring and foiling, which we don't have to do as much because we can graph stuff. Distributing, which has to do with foiling as well. And then substitution is the number one thing. On the hardest questions, a lot of times on SAT math, your job is just plug in points a couple of times and do the math carefully. So, hey, there's the point 3, -8. Plug 3 in for X, -8 for Y, and solve for the variable. But then, sometimes you try these math, functions and they don't work. Well, they're answer choices on a vast majority of the questions. We can use choice A, B, C, D. If the answers are kind of not friendly, they've got variables, or maybe it's a free response, there's no answers, pick your own numbers. Just try throwing in number 2. That's a low, even number. And then, of course, how could we forget about Desmos? I won't allow it. So a few strategies, and then we'll get into just Desmos specifically. And like I said, leave plenty of time for questions. If you're in doubt, if it's a multiple choice question, not a free response, try working backwards. It might be as simple as looking at the answers and saying, oh, those are pretty friendly, especially 3. Maybe I'll start by just plugging that in and seeing if it works. And that'd be pretty easy because if X is 3 and we plug that in, we would get 3 times 3, which is 9, plus 3 is 12. And on the other side, we get 6 minus 5, which is 1. Well, 12 is greater than 1. So this would not be our answer because it says not. There are many ways to solve a question like this. but we always want to think what's the simplest for me. That might be different for you than the person next to you on test day. Desmos or graphing is an option. Solving it algebraically and just doing the actual math like an equation is an option. And plugging in the answers is an option. So I always used to get annoyed when I was driving and my dad, I would ask him, which way do I go? And, oh, you can go this way, you can go this way. Very thick accent. And he's like, every way will get you home. And it was very frustrating for me because I just wanted to know the one way. But on SAT prep and for standardized tests, you need to figure out what is that best way for you, right? What's the path of least resistance where if you see this again, you're going to say, oh, I know what I can do. This works well for me. And you do that method, right? That's how you get really good at this test. It's not a test of intelligence. It's just a test of effort, for better and for worse. Another strategy is, what if the choices look like this? Not very friendly. Big numbers, exponents, variables, yuck. This question might be one where I pick numbers and think about just a value for t. So here we're saying the number of virions, whatever that is, we don't know, we don't care, grown in a cell culture doubles every 12 hours. There's 100,000 of these in the cells at the start of an observation, which if you know exponential modeling, and many of us do, it's not A or B, because the initial amount is the first thing that we're listing. So 100,000 has to be the first number. And then it's saying it doubles every 12 hours. So the question is that 2 to the t over 12? Or is that 2 to the 2t? What I would do is I would think to myself, well, what if t was 1? Because t is 1 means 1 day. And 1 day, as far as I know, has 24 hours. So in 1 day, we want our 100,000 virions to double twice. That would be the correct answer. This says we start with 2 and grow by a factor of 100,000, so those aren't right. If I plugged in 1 for t right there, then you get 1/12, and that says that in 1 day, it doubles 1/12, meaning that it would actually take 12 days for it to double. C is not our correct answer because we're looking at days, not hours. If you were to plug in 1 for t right here, what you would see happening is you get, oh, this becomes 2. And so in 1 day, it'll double twice. Well, hey, that checks out. Every 12 hours, we double. So our answer is D. Again, here, there's other ways you can do it because we could put it in Desmos. If you just know the way exponential modeling works, you're fine. But I do think picking a simple number, in this case, like 1, and just thinking about days and hours would do the trick. So let's look at those content areas, the basic and advanced algebra, the stats and the geometry and trig, and we'll look at some examples for each. I'm not going to do them all, but just kind of give some food for thought and some strategies. And if you have questions, we could probably get back to them at the end. Basic algebra is mx plus b mostly, not point slope form. That's not a thing you should need, but slope intercept. And that's really probably something you spent months on in school but forgotten and haven't done in forever. But it's rise over run. It's using 2 points to create a line. Inequality sometimes comes up, but that's rare. And then sometimes instead of one linear equation, we have multiple. So we have to know where they cross. This is 13 to 15 questions out of 44, so about 35% of the test. And a couple of examples of what this might look like are as follows. First one is how many solutions, how many values of x satisfy this equation. So you'd be surprised that a lot of people just really want to do the math, and instead you're probably better off just graphing these as 2 lines and deciding are they parallel or the same line or just different lines. So we're going to talk about Desmos questions, but that's one of them. And then the one on the right-hand side is a modeling question. This is linear or basic modeling, where our job is to read through and decide what does y mean. So, we can look at this one because it's pretty simple. Y is connected to 1800. 1800 refers to the residential or residence area. So I know that Y is going to refer to the residential area, not the industrial. And then this is one where it's confusing. So to make it less abstract, I would probably pick some numbers and I'd make it simple. We can manipulate Y. So to solve this, I would go Y is 0, Y is 1, Y is 2. Well, when Y is 0, this is just 0. But when Y is 1, that's 1800. So let's think about what that means. This equation is modeling the total number of electronic devices. That means this 1800Y represents that, which means D is not our answer. So we've got there by elimination because we know that 1800Y would be the total. That's what we're measuring in this equation. So Y must just be the average when you take 1800Y and divide it by 1800. That's confusing. You don't really need to understand why this is right. You just need to understand why the other three are wrong. And these are the types of questions that come up over and over and over again. The answer for the one on the left is 0 because they're parallel lines. They would just never intersect, right? And that's the only way two lines could have no solutions. Next up is advanced math. So very similar, 12 to 14, about the same, 35% of the math. This is Algebra 2. This is what you really do have to have under your belt before you take the SAT, in my opinion. Don't have to have taken pre-calc or anything beyond, even stats you don't need, like beyond basic statistics. But this stuff, you're going to see a lot of parabolas. So vertex form, standard form, shifting graphs, exponents and roots. And so the stuff that when we're familiar with and have done more recently in school, some people are actually like better and more comfortable at that because of it. If you're a junior in high school, which most of my students are, this is the stuff we've been seeing more recently and consistently. And here's a couple examples. And these are advanced math, but these are not hard questions. Question on the left asks us to isolate 3k minus 2. So the trap people fall into is they're like, oh, well, Tal told me Desmos all the time, so I'm just going to put this in Desmos. And that would not be great here. It's so many variables, and you're just matching equations. Here, you just multiply by the denominator, 3k minus 2 on both sides, divide by 3n, and we got our answer as choice D. Multiply both sides by the denominator, so that cancels there, right? Because we did 3k minus 2 on both sides, and then once you have 3k minus 2 times 3n equals 7m, you can just divide by the 3n to get rid of it. We let it land right there. The other question is, I'm going to make people think more of like physics class probably, which it can, but it shouldn't. Just know what you're solving for. What is the height from which the ball was dropped? Well, at the moment the ball was dropped, 0 seconds have passed. They are just simply asking you to plug in 0 for t, which is x. And in this case, not always, depending on the form, but in this case, the y-intercept is indeed 600. And that would be your answer. They might have asked about the maximum height, at which point you would have had to plug it in and find the vertex. Or they could have asked, how long does it take before it hits the ground? And that would be an x-intercept, right? So it's all about remembering, graphing stuff, and just interpreting what each part means. But it's the basics. It's vertex, x-intercept, y-intercept. Refreshing that stuff will go a long way. Third is stats, which includes a lot of proportions and unit conversion stuff. So like dimensional analysis, but nothing too crazy. Mean, median, got to know what those are. The fact that like median is like middle of the highway. So that's the middle number, whereas mean is average. Probability and percentages come up quite a bit. And then occasionally like a study, just understanding how it works, but those are rare. And it's like 15 to 20% of the math test. So there's enough there that you got to make sure that you master it. I would say most of these 7 to 9 questions will be pretty simple and straightforward. Just a couple tough ones, but more commonly, the hardest questions for my students are advanced geometry and trig, and the toughest of the algebra. A couple examples. You see a percentage question. Desmos is really great for that. And then you see a mean question, which is actually a nice question because Desmos is also good for that. Plus, you should be able to just look at data set S and T and see that data set T has a bigger mean, right? It has the same numbers without the one. So these, I think, are pretty straightforward examples, but representative of what you will see on test day. Last and least is geometry and trig. 10 to 15-ish% max of the math tests. And you'll see the basics, lines, angles, triangles. So remembering stuff like 180 degrees in a triangle and just things you haven't thought about, circumference versus area, knowing that those formulas are provided. Got to write these out. I'd say more than any other question on any part of the test, you want to draw out shapes if they don't provide that. Even if they do, you probably want to draw it out for yourself. And then got to know your Pythagoras rules, SOHCAHTOA, basic perimeter area and volume. So again, things you maybe haven't done that since 9th grade, and now you're going into senior year, right? So how could we have kept this in our mind? It's there somewhere, but you're going to need to knock off the rust and refresh your memory. And like I said, part of the battle is just remembering, hey, those geometry formulas exist. I can click on a button and pull those up if I need to. 2 example problems here. And we'll finish up with then a bunch of just kind of Desmos strategy work and how to prepare. And I've seen some good questions come in already, so kudos, keep those going. The question here on the left is a right triangle Pythagorean theorem and then rationalization question. So you would draw out the right triangle, you do Pythagoras, and there's a couple options from there. And the one on the right, I mentioned this, but alternate interior, alternate exterior. So knowing that in this case, z would equal y, but also x plus z equals 180. And that would be the way to solve this, making sure that you don't just solve for C as in cat, but Z as in zebra. And then right off the bat, I'd be looking at the answers for the second question and thinking, well, Z is clearly greater than 90 degrees. It says it's not drawn to scale, but it's not going to be drawn that off scale. So A and B for the question on the right actually make no sense. Those are acute angles, and this is clearly more than 90. So again, my job as a tutor has changed quite a bit for SAT because there's just so much that Desmos can do. I do think that to get to this last level where a lot of my students are in the upper level module, but we're struggling on the last 10 questions, which are the hardest generally. You'll see that sometimes going to Desmos will actually lead you astray. It'll take too long. We have too many variables and it doesn't work great. So don't over rely or overcorrect by using it constantly. But you can create tables. You can and should practice with Blue Book SATs and Desmos.com. And we're just going to look at, like, again, it almost feels fraudulent as a tutor, but like, here's a question that is systems of equations. And for the ACT, I'm excited. I'm like, all right, do you want to isolate and substitute? Or should we use elimination? Or should we just use the answer choices? Because there would be 4 choices. But no, this is the SAT. And so it's like, all right, well, I've got 2 linear equations. They are not in mx plus b form, but that's okay because I'm just trying to solve for the solution for y. Well, a solution to a parabola is x-intercepts. That's a different thing, right? So probably if you're in Algebra 2 or calculus type class, you think of a solution and you think x-intercept. But here, this is back to basic algebra. A solution is where they cross. We just want to know the y coordinate of the point of intersection. Well, I'll be darned if I'm going to do any math work on this question or have my students do any math. We're putting in expression or equation 1, equation 2, red line, blue line, and then they cross at the point 5, 3. At that point, I just have to double check, what was I solving for again? Oh, right, not x, but y. Well, the y coordinate at the point of intersection is 3. My answer is 3. Done. 15 seconds, as long as you typed everything in correctly, you're golden. It couldn't be much easier than this. And this happens a lot. Like a lot of the questions will be like this. And then some of the questions will be like this. We've got f of x, which is just y equals, but then this is a polynomial, 2x squared plus x minus 21. And that 2 makes you think, ugh, if I have to factor this, it's not going to be that nice. I don't want to factor this if I don't have to, just because of that leading coefficient. So let's figure out what they're asking. It has zeros, so x-intercepts at points A and B on the xy plane. And they just want to know what's the distance between those 2 points. Well, there's some shortcuts. We could do some math, but to be honest, if I just want to figure out the distance between the 2 x-intercepts, I'm going to graph it. I'm not going to even put f of x equals or y equals. Definitely wouldn't put equals 0. That's not helpful. It's automatically y equals in Desmos. So if I put 2x squared plus x minus 21, that is a quadratic equation that will then graph. Looks like 3 and negative 3.5. The distance between those is when you subtract, you get 6.5. Means your choice C, because we just graphed it, clicked on the points, which you can do, and then found the distance. Easy as that. A lot of people look at this, myself included, and think, ugh, I don't like, would rather not. I'd rather just do the math. But let's read this and try it. An administrator budgets $100,000 to purchase laptops and tablets for a small school. Now we've got some rules. She's got to purchase a minimum of 150 tablets, and those cost $230, whereas laptops cost $640. The question we're solving for is, what is the maximum number of laptops the school administrator can purchase? Obviously, got to be a whole number or an integer because you don't want to get half a laptop. So here I've got, it looks like multiple equations and in fact, multiple inequalities. One of them is the budget inequality. So $100,000, we can't go over that. But we must have at least 150 tablets. So let's see. If we make tablets x, we could say x is greater than or equal to 150. And then the dollar equation or inequality would be the second thing in blue. And this is where it's a little bit tricky. So to satisfy this inequality, we need to be in the double shaded region. So not the blue, not the red, but the purplish part on the bottom right. Meaning that if the y coordinate of the intersection there is 102.344, I can't go above that. The answer here will be 102 because that is the highest we can go for y without getting out of the double shaded region. What's nice here is you might not have understood everything or anything I said there, but if you just know how to set up the inequalities, you don't actually have to understand this question deeply. You can just graph it and think, okay, x was tablets, y was laptops, 102 is my maximum. That's the hardest one we've seen today, but we can make it pretty simple with Desmos. So home stretch, recap for math mastery of the SAT, which like obviously is easier said than done, but this is a test of effort. If you do all the practice, which I'll show you kind of some resources, and if you just review your misses, learn from your mistakes, you will get better fast. The SAT wants you to know a lot about just a few things. So I didn't mention this much, but on multiple choice, you don't want to leave anything blank. There's no points off for wrong answers. So I'll say that again. Leave nothing blank because there's no guessing penalty. So if you have 2 minutes left and 5 questions left, guess C, 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 or A, 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 A. Doesn't matter, but guess the same letter straight down. Consider strategically skipping around. That's really big for verbal, which we'll talk about next week, but for math as well. It tend to get harder as they go in each section, but that doesn't mean that's necessarily the case for you. So if question 17 is taking forever, skip to 18, maybe you'll find it easier. How could you forget to use the Desmos calculator since I've talked about it so much? But towards the end of module 4, for you high scorers, let's say like, hey, maybe I'm in 10th grade, I'm looking at PSAT, early next year or early fall semester, and you really need like a perfect math score. or that's what you're shooting for on SAT is near perfect. For those people, you want to be thinking about basic algebra, like plugging in X, Y points and just trying the math before Desmos. If you're sliding for A and B and C and just like got too many variables, it's not going to work and it's going to take too long. So how do we practice? Well, we have 4 fully digital and adaptive SAT mocks. The thing I like the best about these, so the platform is great. It's not exactly like Blue Book, but it's close. You can pull up Desmos and do everything that you can on the real test. But the score reports are really nice. They show you which types of questions you missed, which questions you missed. And so, like, if you're taking a mock test soon, learn from that. Or in a tutoring session, like if a student's working with me in the first session, that would be our thing. We'd go back through the questions they missed, and then throughout tutoring, kind of do that with a bunch of mock tests, keep revisiting things that have given us trouble. Right? So make mistakes, that's good. Learn from them. And then Blue Book, so the app on which you will take the real test, has 7 practice SATs, and then 3 digital PSATs as well. Once you're done with those, there's something called the question bank. It's meant for educators, but you can use it as a student. You can filter questions, search for specific types and difficulty levels. So it's really good for this high level practice once you've seen all these Blue Book tests and questions. A lot of it's time on task, so pick a test date or 2 test dates, ideally 3 total, and work backwards from those as you plan for studying and potentially tutoring. Our 3 cornerstones are academic tutoring, test prep, which is my bread and butter, and EF coaching. I'll put this number back on screen. Before I do, I want to make sure you guys are aware of this coming up, a couple webinars, and we're going to launch our second poll. So if you guys are interested in any of these, go ahead and register. Jed is the only one of these people who I know well, and he's the founder of Applerouth and got MD, PhD, all the degrees, and is really a genius, but also a very good speaker. So I definitely highly recommend listening to him speak whenever you have that opportunity. And so these are coming up in May, kind of as AP craziness winds down. And then finally, we're going to launch one last poll, and I'm opening it up for questions and answers. Again, my name's Tal. My schedule gets pretty full in the summer, but if you are interested in tutoring, you can call in and request to work with me, and I will always try to make requests work if I can. If you don't have questions, hopefully you learned a lot. Feel free to call it an evening and have a great rest of the week. I'm just going to go ahead and open it up now and answer some questions. First, a good question. Are you allowed to bring a calculator? After all I said about Desmos, right, are we allowed to bring our own? Yeah, you can, you should bring your own, right, just to have it. Some people are more comfortable. There's little things like radians and degrees that you might be more comfortable on your calculator. And just about any calculator is legal, meaning like unless it connects to the internet or has a full keyboard or makes noise, it's probably a fine calculator to bring. It'll be allowed. So yeah, that was, I think, the second part to your question, which is you can bring any kind, even like TI Inspire. I think maybe like the TI Inspire CAS, there's like a type of it that isn't allowed because, like I said, it connects to the internet. Not that that would even help on test day. I'm going to go back to a slide just for the next question. Thank you for saying the slide number. That's so helpful. So, okay, I'm going to get to this in a moment. First, if on practice tests, the topic I score lowest on changes every time, what should I do to fix this? You know, it's interesting. I don't put all that much stock as a tutor into like, oh, I'm missing information and ideas versus standard English conventions, or in math, I'm missing basic algebra versus advanced math. I will say that the SAT Suite question bank, which if you Google it, you'll find it easily, is a good way to hone in on specific question types. But to be honest, I would look more closely at your practice tests and think about, where am I missing questions? Is it module 1 and 3? Because I got to fix those first. Is it towards the end? Is it like, because a lot of times it's not based on the question type at all. It's just because you ran out of time. So think about whether that's actually a trend or maybe it's just an anomaly. If it changes every time, it's probably more about your pacing and general strategy rather than a weakness or in one particular topic. So the question about this particular one on the left side, how would you use Desmos for this first problem? Well, I'll show you. Let's pull up a Desmos screen real quick. And so as you follow along here, let me go back to the slide. It's of 1.6 million tiles, 1.248 million are ceramic. What percentage of the tiles are ceramic? So Desmos is silly, but what I want to do is 1.248 million, no commas because Desmos doesn't like it, equals what percent? I'm going to just hit Shift 5, but you can also do it right down here under functions, right? Kind of a pain, but it's down there somewhere. But I think in this case, like probably not the best way. Just either write it, or even if you type percent, it'll shift it to percent of. And then just going to check that number again, which was 1.6 million. Zeros, I do. This red squiggly line tells me we've graphed something. So you have to know to zoom way, way out, and then boom, there's your answer. Looks like 1.248 million is 78% of 1.6 million. If I wanted to double prove it, I would just type in 78% of 1600000, too many zeros, and then we see that also gets us back to the 1,248,000. So for this question, our answer would be, wait for it, C, as in cat, 78%. This is also like if you just divide the two numbers, you get 0.78. So there's other ways, but that's how I would use Desmos. For the one on the right side, you can literally just type the word mean and put the numbers in with commas in between this time, and it'll spit out the mean. So like very easy for harder questions to test those. Yeah, hopefully that was helpful. Next question is, what are the telltale signs of each kind of question? So I think I understand what you mean. If you're looking at like a basic versus advanced algebra, the telltale sign of algebra is you're going to have mx plus b. It's going to be like just literally linear. The telltale sign for advanced math is parabolas, solutions, x-intercepts, y-intercepts, but more in like a curve or like complicated setting. And then like the signs within each category are more going to be recognized by practice. You'll see it and you'll be like, oh, I've done this before, right? So that's more just going to be situational, and you'll know that from practice. Yeah, good questions. Got a couple more and then we'll wrap it up. Here's one about like timing. So does failing to complete a few questions because the time runs out on you? And this is something that I mentioned, but like I said, should have mentioned more. So the question is, if you run out of time and don't answer everything, does that count as failing points, like missed questions, or will it score the test based on what you've done and ignored? The answer is a question that you leave blank is a wrong answer. Leave nothing blank because there's no points off for wrong answers. So if you find yourself in that situation, it's very possible, right? 2 minutes left, 5 questions. Oh, crud, what do I do? This is where I mentioned you bubble straight down the line. So like, let's say they're all multiple choice. That's what's left. You go B, 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 B. Or A. It doesn't matter what letter. I remember learning in high school, like C is right more often than the others. I don't think that's true. But you want to do this instead of Christmas treeing it. Because if you pick like A and then B and then C and then D, right, and then C, like if you do this, you are very likely to miss every single one. So this is bad. If you go straight down the line, yeah, we probably won't get them all, but we're also not going to miss them all. Very likely we'll get 1 or 2 right, just statistically. So a short answer to your question is leave nothing blank. There are no points off for wrong answers. Really good questions. I appreciate those. The recordings generally get sent out on Friday, the week of the presentation, so you should get those. Please reach out to the email or phone number with any questions, concerns, or anything that you would like to know from us. And good luck on SAT and beyond. I appreciate you guys joining tonight.